Do you know when I was up in New York this week, I met with a few of your bosses, and they brought you up. They told me they said you told them to tell me good afternoon or something. So I'm going to say good afternoon despite what Chad believes, but yesterday we heard directly from the President on the status of the administration's plan to mitigate the impact of the coronavirus in the United States. By assigning the Vice President as head of our government's response, it is a clear sign of how serious President Trump is taking this situation. The strategic move will ensure coordination across the government and empower our health experts as they expand access to lab testing, screening, and work with industry on developing a vaccine and a treatment. Ensuring we have the appropriate resources is another key component of our response plan, which is why the congressional appropriation leaders are working on a bipartisan basis to appropriate the adequate amount of money needed. My office has also been actively engaged back in the district to ensure we have the most up-to-date information on the confirmed case in Solano County. What is certain here is that there's just no time for politics. Diseases don't know party lines, and I would imagine members of Congress would drop the partisanship to coordinate efforts on keeping our country safe. In 2014, when the country dealt with the Ebola crisis and there was a different president in the White House and a different majority in the House, my tone was exactly the same. I said, let's work on funding, remove red tape for the FDA, and let's tackle this epidemic head on. Today's Democrats, unfortunately, can't help but put politics over the country, and now what appears to be almost every single Democratic leader. From Nancy Pelosi to Chairman Nadler, now the Democratic presidential frontrunner, a senator, Bernie Sanders, chose to attack Pence's religion and spread misinformation on a vaccine that isn't even available yet. To my colleagues on the other side of the aisle attempting to seize this as a political moment, I simply say stop it. Stop it on behalf of the American public, stop it on behalf of the security of this country, and more importantly, on the health of all Americans. By this is who they are. They would rather attack the president's response to a crisis than work together to solve an epidemic. And it was confirmed by their Democratic frontrunner earlier this week. They would rather commend communism than defend democracy. And here's the fact. The prospect of socializing medicine like the one that Bernie praises would leave us with far less cures, which would dramatically limit our ability to mitigate the spreading of disease. I want to highlight what we have done when we were in the majority. In the last 5 years, we have been able to increase the funding for NIH and CDC by almost 40%. We are preparing ourselves for this day. One thing that we created, and we were in the majority for those 5 years, on average, almost $2 billion increase year over year. Tom Cole led this and also created the Infectious Disease Rapid Response Fund, exactly for what we're dealing with today. We did not want this to come to fruition, but we wanted to be prepared for it. Just as the president taking that action of limiting the number of planes and from what countries to come into America. Many on the other side criticized him, but in hindsight, he was right in the timing to do it. I wish that we would see China's government be more open. It would help the rest of the world to be able to deal with our current situation. And the one thing I would say, looking at what Bernie Sanders is craving, a Castro-style health care, I would like to remind everybody of a Washington Examiner article in 2016 that explains the truth of a healthcare system in Cuba. A two-tier system where the haves, those were the foreign guests and the Cuban insiders like Castro and his cronies, experienced fine care. And the have-nots, that means everybody else, would have trouble even finding an aspirin. Members of Congress should be called out when they mislead the American public. That is why you'll see today Mario Diaz-Balart will be introducing a resolution condemning Sanders' comment, specifically for disregarding the history of what has happened in Cuba, the human rights abuses, the forced indoctrination, and the authoritarian actions on the policies of the communist Castro dictatorship in Cuba. It should go without saying that the American people deserve more. This is nothing more than a dereliction of duty, and I respect and expect all members to work together to put the public first, and of course, and foremost, their safety. Let's open it up for questions. Yes, sir.
Last night, the president said that now is not the time to expand travel restrictions to countries like Italy and South Korea, where we're seeing rapid spreading of the coronavirus. Do you agree with that assessment right now, or do you think that, given that there's cases now in California where they don't know where the origin is coming from, that they should consider more travel restrictions?
I know the president has always been forward-looking at this, and he gets the most up-to-date information. I would trust him on that judgment. He was right before on the protection of America. He gets the update information, and we'll take that day by day to see where we need to be. Yes, sir.
How is it partisan? And based on your remarks about what you said about the speaker and others on the coronavirus, when the president, in his press conference last night, called the Speaker of the House incompetent, he called Chuck Schumer, the minority leader in the Senate, crying Chuck Schumer. Isn't there some partisanship going on his side as he attacks the Democratic leaders here in this institution?
I don't believe so, because he was referring to a question and the basis of what those leaders have already said. And let me quote, Speaker Pelosi, the Trump administration has mounted an opaque and chaotic response to this outbreak. Schumer was going on requesting, after we requested money, just picking a whole nother number. You have Chairman Nadler. Unfortunately, all evidence indicates that the Trump administration preparation is dangerously inadequate. We will have our fourth briefing from the Trump administration of all members of Congress come tomorrow. I have been down to the Situation Room in a bipartisan, bicameral briefing of all. The president has continuing with his entire administration, never from a places of a partisanship, but for the idea that they would take it to that level right now, it harms the American public. And I think the president was making that case. Yes, sir.
It seems like the most recent case in California, doctors did suspect that it could have been coronavirus, but because of the CDC's own limits in terms of requirements, traveling to China or being exposed to somebody knowingly that was traveling to an affected area, the CDC was limited in terms of how quickly it could respond and test this person. Should the CDC be looking at those requirements and potentially making changes to that?
I would say the CDC is, and we learn something more about this, this coronavirus every day. And this is the point I would make. If China would have allowed our doctors and our scientists in earlier, the world would be safer. We requested it. We offered it. I know within the CDC they work with the other doctors in China, but unfortunately when it comes to a level of political leadership there, they had denied us. They denied when it even started back early on, the science that we found in November. No, CDC continues to work day in and day out. And at the very first, when we would look, it would be about if you were in that region within China. Now, this is the first indication. And if you look at the total number we have, I think of my latest update this morning when I was talking to the Vice President was 15 in America. The others came where they had captured it somewhere. We're treating them here now. This is the first one on the outside. Did not get tested because it didn't meet that requirement. So I assume they're reassessing that and looking and making sure that others, if it's appropriate, to make sure have that test. Yes, ma'am.
Speaker Pelosi just said that you're close to reaching a bipartisan agreement on funding. And I wonder if you could share anything with us about what kind of number you're looking at in terms of appropriations and how you would like to see the money spent.
Look, it's not my place to sit here and pick a number. The one thing I would say, just exactly what the president said, we will do whatever is needed to make sure we keep this country safe. That's why we have the experts going forward. That's why we have the appropriators sitting down, because we want to have accountability at the same time. And I'm hopeful that we can get this done next week. This isn't something to wait around. It's not something where Chuck Schumer should play politics with. And I will give credit to the appropriators who've been sitting in the room making it happen. There's a number of things I would listen to the experts on what they need, and that's what they have piled together when it comes to supplemental from the White House coming down and the medical experts as well. That's what we'll look at, and I think you'll find a very bipartisan vote. And from my point of view, I want to get it done faster than waiting around, and I don't think you're going to see an argument on either side. You know, having been through these a few times before, just picking a number out of a hat like that never seems to work properly. I would like to know what the experts believe they need, make sure we fund that. I know where the supplemental is, and having been through this before, normally when a supplemental comes, Congress does something maybe even in a little higher basis. We want to make sure we're prepared. One thing I could tell you when we were in the majority, we have been preparing for this before we ever knew it was coming. That's why we had funded NIH, that's why we had increased the funding as well into CDC, and that's why we built that rapid response for infectious diseases.
Mr. Ritter, does your conference need to see offsets?
No, not in this situation.
How concerned are you about the steep drops in the stock market and the economic repercussions for that?
Well, it is concerning because it looks at a supply side chain and others of where it is. I believe once we get a complete handle, the country sees that, the market will come back. We have a very strong economy. I watched one person speaking on CNBC this morning talking about some of that in other areas was a drop based upon who they think the Democrat nominee would be. It's a combination of others. But when we get back and we solve this problem, I think as a country we should take a deep breath and have a real discussion about the supply chain in America. Have we allowed too much to move out of the country? Are we reliant upon other countries to make sure our economy continues to move? And I think especially from those essential requirements we need for medicine, for minerals and others, we should look at that in a different basis and not have ourselves in this position again.
So Ritter, FISA deadline coming up. You've got a variety of views in your own ranks about how this needs to be handled. What's your view? Attorney General is asking for a clean reauthorization in the Senate this week. What do you want to see?
I want to see reforms to Title I. I know a number of members want to see that as well. I have reached out to Steny Hoyer. We're working together along with Judiciary Committee and the Intel Committee. I know that the Democrats had to pull their bill yesterday. I think anything that moves within FISA should be bipartisan. There is a need for reauthorization, but there is a great need for reforms. And I think in Title I is the critical section that it needs, and everybody understands that as well. This can get done. Unfortunately, that the majority party has been spending the vast majority of their time on impeachment and investigations when they should have been focusing on this as well. But I think having done that, we've learned a great deal about Title I and the reforms needed to protect American citizens. We have a number of amendments. I won't walk you through today, but we're talking with the Democrats.
What are the concerns that Republicans have after the experience in 2016? I mean, what's in there right now that's problematic for you?
I don't want to see abuse of the system along to American citizen. I don't want to see it used for political basis. We've had reports back, even from our own Justice Department, about the misuse within the FISA court. So how can we have some check and balances that this never happens again? I mean, I think all Americans would want that, and that's what we're having discussions about right now.
Can it get done before March 15th, the deadline?
Oh, yeah, there's a will, there's a way. We have laid out a number of amendments that we see that could be, and we were prepared yesterday for the markup to offer those amendments, to improve the bill, to move forward. It was the Democrats who decided to pull it back. Steny Hoyer has worked on this issue before, has worked it through when he was in the minority working with the Republicans as well. I believe we can work together to improve and make sure we have those reforms to protect American citizens, at the same time protect us from any foreigners who seek to do us harm.
Would it be appropriate to add FISA to the coronavirus stuff?
No. I do not think coronavirus should be added to anything. It should be standing on its own, and it should move just like that, and it should move fast. I think a real sign of not playing politics with it, making sure both sides are working together, and making sure the American public has the resources they need to combat this, just as the president has requested.
Are you concerned that the administration has eliminated some positions dealing with infectious disease? They eliminated the NSC position and also, I think, have scaled back CDC epidemiology around the world.
NIH and CDC have more money from this administration than they had from the past administration. In any organization, they constant improvement. However, they streamline that in the process to make sure the outcome, the number one thing I want to see here is the outcome and the safety of the American public. That's exactly what the president is looking for as well. That's why he has provided them more money. and being prepared for this situation. Thank you all very much.